Hey, welcome to the 2023 Mock Selection Committee. I'm Tim Kruger, joined today by Brad Wachtel, Kerry Miller, Graham Dorn, Dave Ullman. We are going to go through and kind of just take the bracket that we presented to you last week and kind of do some tweaks of the results that have happened. We've already kind of like reshuffled the 9 through 11s, and we're going to go over those here in a minute. And then we'll just we're obviously going to fill in the AQs from 12 down to 16. And then take a look at the top and the middle and see if there's any major changes we want to make there and discuss those. We're going to just have a 1-hour session. Everybody's busy. We all have brackets to get finalized and sent out. So you'll see this final bracket we'll put this up on Twitter here later on this afternoon. Anybody got anything to say before we get started?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that another interesting year of bracketing. I feel like every year you get something. There's new challenges, different types of resumes, all across the board. But what it boils down to is you're comparing everything team to team. So you might find some resumes that are worse this year than compared to last year, but it's an interesting process, and we're trying to mimic what the committee's doing.
Well said. Well said. Yes, challenging is the word. It's always something new. All righty, so let's get started here. I'm going to share my screen here real quickly and kind of take a look at where we are right now with the bracket, and you guys all have a copy of this, so we can take a look here and get started with going over. We kind of did a little vote last night, a consensus basically ranking our teams on the bottom. So let's go down there and kind of finish that up. So right now we have from the bottom 9, we have Auburn. I'm sorry, back up. Bottom 9, we have Penn State. Then we have Auburn, Boise, USC, Utah State, Mississippi State, Providence, and then the play-ins, Arizona State, Rutgers, Pitt, North Carolina State. All right. So let's just start. I don't know, where do you guys want to start, bottom or top of this group?
Can we start at Penn State and say, I also in my bracket have Penn State 36, and it is impossible to put them there. So I have put them, they're my 36, but they're a 10 seed, and I hate it.
Great.
Because there's so many Big Ten teams in that 8-9 range.
Right. Great comment, Kerry. I guess we could leave it there for now, but knowing we're probably going to have to go back and switch Penn State and Auburn. That would be fair to everyone.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, and again, we have no idea because, last year the committee obviously did not really do anything with Saturday or Sunday games. Every committee is slightly different. And I think depending on where, this Penn State thing to me is it's somewhere along that 9 to, if they count, yesterday's win for them, they could be a low 8 potentially as well. So I think that's a real, where on that line do they fall? And it's, we don't have hours to debate it, but that would be one to me. I mean, we do have a couple of options. I mean, Iowa, of course, they're just a little higher on our board, but, Purdue could be opposite. Illinois could be in that pod within the bracketing rules. It would not be ideal, but I think the committee would do something like that over dropping somebody a seed line now, unless they didn't absolutely had no choice.
They've only played once, right?
Illinois and Purdue only played once.
Yeah.
The Illinois matchup is possible. The difference for me is I have Florida Atlantic higher than we do as a consensus. So Michigan State is an 8 for me. So I have 5 teams that should be 8 or 9 seeds. So it's literally impossible.
So just play the Big Ten tournament over again is what you're saying.
Right? Then Penn State wins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, that's one of the things, for me, Michigan State's my last 7, but I mean, you're right. You're
all right. Well, yeah, let's cross that bridge when we come to it and see what happens.
I will say For me personally, I actually do have Auburn still hanging on to 36 overall and Penn State 37 overall. And it gets back to Dave's point. I think historically, in recent years especially, the committee has not shown a lot of care about what happens on Saturday and Sunday. And because of that, I just don't think personally that Penn State has moved that far up yet.
I agree. That's where I have it too, Grim. But let's move on. Issue of time. So, all right. So we're okay with that. Boise, USC, Utah State. Any discussion there? Those next three.
Utah State's an interesting one. Obviously, a lot of us didn't even have them in a couple of weeks ago, but it just seemed like the resumes kind of took a nosedive for a lot of those teams towards the bubble. And that just made Utah State's, their strong metrics really stand out. And I think I'm okay with having them, as that last 10 seed. I think they are deserving of it, because you just look at the teams beneath them and, maybe Mississippi State, but all of those teams have significant flaws.
I agree.
Just out of curiosity for the group, does anybody, if you were going to order Boise State and Utah State at this point, would everybody have Boise a slot ahead?
Yes.
Yep.
Just have a little more quality on that resume to me.
Mm-hmm.
I personally, when you look at USC and Arizona State, I looked at them really hard last night. They're really, really close. And most everybody has a gap, including in my bracket. But I mean, when you look at them, I mean, you really wanted to argue. I wouldn't agree with it, but if you really wanted to argue, you could put Arizona State over USC. I mean, USC only has really one high quality win, and Arizona State has two. But there's other things. There's metrics involved there too, obviously. So it all balances out. And I think in this, where we have them 5 ahead, I mean, it's so razor thin here, guys. I mean, it's, it's hard to slip teams in between teams.
Something I will mention is just now that I'm looking at it, actually 41 through 46 is the exact seed order I have for those 6 teams. So matching to a T what I have.
So you're good. You're Mr. Consensus. Providence. More and more steam here. That longtime beat writer I know tweeted out yesterday that he's even on the Cooley train going to Georgetown, which is shocking. I haven't had a chance to connect with him yet, which kind of maybe explains if things are running around why they've had the downfall they've had. I just
At all.
Right.
And they don't really have that. They don't have the high, Q1 road win or any real legitimate road win against a tournament team. But when you start looking at the teams beneath them that we have, Rutgers is a team that has the injury that is significant that we would expect the committee to take into account, but we don't know how much they're actually going to take into account. NC State is 1-6 against Q1 opponents. Not a very particularly strong resume at all. Arizona State has the Q4 loss, and Pittsburgh is on shaky ground. I mean, they have the worst metrics of any team that we have in the field.
The other thing I'd say about Providence is just even over the last few days and the last couple weeks especially, the Marquette and UConn home wins now carry more weight for me than they did a couple of weeks ago because those teams have just performed better. So I think even though they're at home, they are more valuable than I was treating them a couple of weeks ago.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say, to me, that order of Rutgers Providence has gone back and forth. To Brad's point, I think it's how's the committee going to weigh the injury factor versus that, because Rutgers' level of quality wins is far superior overall. So it kind of comes down to their metrics, have some issues with Rutgers. So that's been one of those that's because to me, it's the lap. One of them is the very last before the Dayton, and the other one goes to Dayton.
Yeah, and I think in terms of Rutgers, the problem is if you just look at their, how they've played since that Mawat Mag injury, they've only beaten, they won at Penn State in a game they were down by 19. Penn State heading into the Big Ten tournament was a bubble team. They beat Michigan in the Big Ten tournament, which, they're on the outside looking in. And then they had one other win. Who did they beat? I can't remember, but
Indiana.
no, Indiana was early in the season. It was they won at Wisconsin, who is a team that we don't have in the field right now. So it's a nice road win. Technically, it's only a Q2, but they really haven't beaten any, even like teams that are going to be 8 seeds or above that are in the field right now with the current roster that they have. So again, it's subjective. What is the committee thinking? We don't know. We can only take our best guesstimation.
So I think we're pretty consensus here. Is there anybody outside of this that we even think remotely has a chance? I mean, I've gone back and forth with Oklahoma State.
Yeah. I think Oklahoma State for me is the first team out. And I think it's just that call of, does the committee say Oklahoma State's bunched up there with West Virginia as a team that performed well in the Big 12, or do they look at what I ultimately decided, which is 0-9 against Texas, Kansas State, and Baylor's just not good enough?
Well, the other thing I would add is West Virginia had a couple of non-conference victories of note that Oklahoma State did not, which was a bit of a separator between the two. And then to me, ultimately, it just comes down to how palatable is 18 and 15. I don't think we've ever seen 18 and 15. I believe the only two 15-loss teams that have gotten in, Vanderbilt and Alabama, were both 19 and 15. So there's not a precedent for it. Doesn't mean it won't happen. And, if there's going to be a surprise today, I think that would be one of the ones that could happen.
I agree. Dave and I had a little sidebar on this yesterday and kind of went back and forth because I said, man, most people have Oklahoma State out, and then most people have West Virginia 9. That's a wide gap when you put together. There's only one victory separating them. The resumes look fairly similar, but Dave pointed out, West Virginia has had much more impressive non-conference wins. And then, like Graham pointed out, the 0-9 too. So I think there is separation. And, historically, we want to go to all those bad losses. The only argument I made was, and again, head-to-head doesn't matter, but they just pounded North Carolina State 3 times. And yeah, it's a matchup thing, but still there is that, but
yeah,
I just think,
Tim, I would argue that they actually have the best wins of any of the teams on the bubble. Clemson, I really actually believe they have the best collection. But for me, it was the 102nd ranked streak, the schedule, as you talked about. I just could not get past playing such a bad strength of schedule in comparison to the other teams around there.
yeah.
Well, and then you add in, like I said, it's very hard. You have one really bad loss, you can overcome it. 3 of them is very difficult. I mean, Boston College, I can excuse a conference game on the road. BC wasn't horrible at the end of the year in the 150s. But when you're losing to Loyola Chicago and Louisville and South Carolina at various points, if they'd happened 2 of them early, you could say, okay, it's a different team, but they spaced them out. And I agree. Clemson has some really nice wins, and they may surprise us, but that non-conference schedule of over 330, that's usually if somebody's close, that kills them.
And that's rarely do you see 4 bad losses, 166 plus. I mean, usually see one in the 90s or 100s or something, but that's unprecedented. Kerry, do you have something to add?
I was going to see if we were going to discuss my team, which would be Vanderbilt.
Go ahead. Knock yourself out, man.
Yeah. I've not articulated this myself. I've seen it. It's been floating around Twitter today, and I guess it's been kind of in the back of my head, but we've been saying for years now, the conference tournaments don't matter. And is this the year the selection committee is like, no, you got to stop saying that. We're going to put Vanderbilt in. We're going make Penn State a 7 seed. Like I'm not going there with Penn State, but I think with what we're looking at on the bubble, we've discussed NC State just has really 2 good wins of any value, both at home. Arizona State, I don't know, Oklahoma State, it's just a whole bunch of who knows, but Vanderbilt has 7 wins over the field, also swept Florida, only has 1 really bad loss, but I know they're probably not getting in, but I think it's very easy to make the case for them.
I think if you're gonna put Vanderbilt there, then you probably need to include Wisconsin as part of that list, because Wisconsin's resume isn't much worse. If it could even be better than Vanderbilt's. They don't have the bad losses. They just have the 1 Q3 loss, and they have 7 wins over the field as well. So, it wouldn't surprise me if Wisconsin was in that first 4 out category too. I don't think they will get in.
And I do still have Wisconsin first 4 out.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense then.
Yeah, on that list from the first 4 out, the question really becomes is Nevada still in that group, or does Oklahoma State, Clemson, Wisconsin, and Vanderbilt take up those 4 spots?
I think Nevada should be in that group.
I would agree.
I mean, they're definitely another team that could surprise us, with 4 quad 1 wins. That the last week or 2 down to end the season just really crushed them.
You know what they remind me of is Tulsa from 2016, when I actually had Tulsa entering the AAC tournament, and then they just got absolutely blown out by Memphis. And I think the consensus became, you can't get blown out like that in a, let's be honest, not one of the toughest conference tournaments, and still expect to make the field. I think the same thing is happening with Nevada. But I also think Nevada is similar to Xavier last year, where the resume is good enough, but are they really one of the best 36? And I think the committee will decide no.
And that's what I think we're going to see. My guess is, and we've kind of seen it in the past, how the committee judges the Mountain West Conference. Some of these resumes might be better than you might think they deserve a better seed than what they're actually going to get. Like a San Diego State, for example. Yes, they won the regular season, they won the conference. It's not at the same level as some of these other top tier conferences.
Yeah, they're tough out. They're tough out, man. Okay. We good?
I think at the bottom, yep.
All right. Let us move on here. Second, so let's move up to the top now and just kind of take a look at that. I'm not really, as an issue of time, we got like about a half hour left. I'm not really, if we run a little bit over, that's fine. But I'm not really crazy about, moving teams around one seed line within their seed spot. But, it's okay. We can do that. A long discussion, I guess what I'm saying. But how are we sitting with the way we had them was Alabama, Kansas, Houston, Purdue. I personally, I'll start. I just think if Kansas had won yesterday, I think I would have flipped them. Committee had them this way 3 weeks ago. I haven't had a long look at Alabama. They kind of look like they're back, playing a little better here, especially last 2 days. They look pretty good. You had the Bill Self thing. I don't know how much that's going to come into play. You've got an injury. You had an injury on Kansas too yesterday. I'm just leaving it. If they go Kansas, they go Kansas. But I'd like to hear what anybody else has to say.
I think to me, real quick, the more interesting thing is, the committee had Houston 2 before. Houston hasn't lost. I just have this sneaking suspicion in the back of my mind they're going to end up with Kansas losing yesterday. It's going to end up right back where it started 3 weeks ago, and it's going to go Alabama, Houston, Kansas, Purdue, and then Texas at 5.
Yep.
After UCLA losing, because I think had Texas not have 8 losses, I think they could have, I think that's the way I ended up today, not because I think Kansas doesn't have a better resume than Houston, but they didn't 3 weeks ago. They had a better resume 3 weeks ago too, and that's not the way they had it. So
everybody okay with that flip on UCLA, Texas? I think I'm for it.
Yes, definitely.
Yep.
Okay, I'll make that flip, but go ahead and discuss the top
In
four.
fact, I moved Arizona back in front of UCLA and have Arizona 6 where they were before and UCLA 7,
Same.
especially with Clark questionable. I mean, I've heard he's going to play, but do we know?
No, Clark's done.
Okay.
Adam Bona might play.
Yeah, add the other one. Yeah, you're right. May or may not play. So
We unanimous on that move too?
We're not unanimous, but I think it's a tough call. I personally
Yeah.
still think UCLA is above, but I could see it either way. I do
I
think
think
Arizona.
I have
I would-
UCLA above too. I mean,
Yeah,
they
UCLA
won the
above.
conference by 4 games.
That's what agree.
I don't have it's a split in hairs really. So
Okay. All right, let's go back to the top four. We're gonna make any moves there. Anybody else?
I like Tennessee over UConn for the final 3 seed. I like it.
I'm sorry.
Tennessee 12.
I'm
UConn
sorry, Graham.
13.
Hey, Graham, I'm sorry. I just wanted to get that top four because there was some discussion there on that.
Oh,
Alabama,
okay. I thought
Kansas.
you meant top 4 seed lines, not top 4 overall.
Yeah.
Okay. I get
Yeah,
it now.
yeah, top four
Yeah.
overall.
I actually agree with Dave's assessment that I think it's 1 Alabama, 2 Houston, 3 Kansas, 4 Purdue.
I agree with that. Just because the way the committee had it, Kansas didn't win the Big 12. Houston hasn't lost. Today's result probably isn't going to matter. I don't think they're going to make a change based on what happens today.
Gary?
I mean, I will say I think Kansas will move to 2nd overall if Houston loses, just because I do think Kansas.
who gets the Midwest region?
Yeah. It's a huge deal.
So because if I think Kansas would have had the Midwest region wrapped up, whether they're 1 or 2 overall, had they won. I think if Memphis beats Houston today, then I could easily see them putting Kansas in the Midwest.
But what if they beat him without Sasser?
Yeah, I can't answer all the
I mean,
points.
I mean, Kansas didn't have McCullough herself yesterday too. I think turnabout's fair play.
Yeah, true. Kerry, you got any thoughts on that?
I still have Kansas at 1 overall. I'm not messing with it. I thought they were solidly ahead heading into the week. They made it to the Big 12 championship. I thought that was enough, but I'm not. I feel like these 3, you can just shuffle them up and pull them out in any order, and can't really be mad with what the committee decides. I think we could see Houston at 1 overall. I don't know.
Okay, so it sounds to me like we kind of have a consensus on Houston 2, Kansas 3. Is that correct? And I'm only going to worry about this just because it's a top 4, really. Correct?
Yep.
I think so.
All right. Purdue, Texas, UCLA, Baylor. Now here we come. The biggest thing here is probably Marquette to 8. I mean, I would think is that pretty much unanimous?
Yep.
I think Baylor they got double-digit losses now. They haven't been playing as well lately. Marquette winning the Big East championship and the Big East regular season. It makes sense. I think they should be there.
Do we drop them to 9 or Gonzaga up, or how do we do those next 3? Gonzaga, Kansas State, Baylor.
I ended up with it, but it's not that big a deal. I ended up with it as Baylor, Gonzaga, and then Kansas State. I think Kansas State's the 3rd of that group, probably.
Yeah.
Whether you
So I
have
had it.
Gonzaga or Baylor ahead, I don't know.
That's how I had it. So Brad had it. Anybody else vehemently opposed?
I'll say I still have Baylor 8th overall and Marquette 9th overall, just because I think the committee said they were feeling pretty good about their top 8 seeds earlier this week. And frankly, I was burned by Tennessee last year, not moving up to the 2 line. But, I think it really just depends on whether the committee factored in last night's result or not.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think when
if
you're
you
comparing Baylor and Gonzaga, it's so close. You can go head to head, and Baylor beat Gonzaga on a neutral court. So that's my tiebreaker.
That's how I
I'm
feel
with-
Baylor Marquette. Marquette won by like 30 against Baylor.
Right.
I'm with you. I'm with you, Graham, on that. But I mean, if they put any kind of like, finesse into this, I mean, that was pretty impressive the way the last two nights, what Marquette did. I mean,
Plus, they have the best record against high Q1 opponents of the three of those teams.
yeah,
which the committee absolutely values. I remember last year, the one I got wrong was Villanova and Tennessee on that 2 and 3 line. Tennessee might have like all the better metrics across the board. They were 4 and 7 against high Q1 opponents. Villanova was 4 and 4, so they had the slightly better record. I don't know if that's why it was like that, but I feel like, especially the committee talking about how much how important those high Q1 wins are. That was the difference for me.
okay. As Dave mentioned earlier, before most everybody got on, here's a big one that's tough. Okay, this 12-13. So I think we got to really dig into this. So we've got these teams all kind of in line for it: UConn, Tennessee, Indiana, Virginia, maybe. I don't know. I think that those would probably be the candidates, right?
I actually had
I don't see-
Xavier.
Xavier, you could throw Xavier in there, sure. So those will be for the 12-13 slots, those 5 teams would probably be the biggest candidates here. I just compared them all, and UConn stood out to me as being the best of the 3 when you look at their resume. Just from a pure basketball standpoint, I mean, they could really do some damage for whatever. They were pretty close to 500. Virginia's got an injury now, Then you get down to Xavier. Xavier's, ruled Fremantle out. So,
Slim pickings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I ultimately, maybe it's like Graham. I originally was going to move Connecticut up, but then I had to ask myself a question. We all thought Connecticut should have been a 3 before, and they weren't even 4.
Yep.
So has Connecticut done enough to slide from potentially, I guess, somewhere on the 5 line is where they would have? Were they mentioned in that other group that was considered?
Yeah, they were mentioned. There's
But they don't border them, right?
Connecticut.
So
I think Miami was in there.
Mary's.
Yeah.
St. Mary's and what? So the question is, given the injuries and everything else, and how Connecticut's finished the season, even if you give them the benefit of the doubt and say they were 21, or I guess be 17, right? Top 5 seed.
Right.
Have they jumped to 12 and passed? I think it's easy to think that they passed Indiana, despite the fact that they beat Purdue at Purdue since this time. And I think with Xavier's injury, probably past them. It just, to me, it's just that's the thing. It's that, did they do enough to jump all the way up and take Tennessee's spot?
I think it's not so much what UConn has done. I just think it's what Tennessee, I think where they're at right now. They've lost a few games. They lost a crucial player to their team. UConn is seems like they're playing much better, like they were at the beginning of the season. But I feel like Tennessee should be dinged to seed line, because I don't think they deserve that, to be on that line, just based on, I know it's a small sample size, but based on the results of the last 3-4 games, I feel like they should be on that next line. And I think, does this happen? But a little basketball sense needs to be brought into it. And which is why I give UConn the edge to go along with the metrics.
Yeah. Right. The other thing with go ahead, Karen.
From a shirts and skins standpoint, as we go back to, I'm working on my power rankings right now. I have Connecticut at 6 and Tennessee at 19. So if it's that close and they're going to go to the eye test, I think it's clearly UConn. But I'm exactly with Dave. Like, if there had not been a top 16 reveal, I mean, we'd probably be debating UConn for a 2 seed, like just looking at their resume. But we have to just keep like mentally knocking them down. Same with Gonzaga. Like, they would be probably a 2 seed as well. So I kept UConn as a 4, and it's razor thin between really 4 teams.
For me, it's just procedural. I think Tennessee was probably voted in there at that 12 spot earlier this week, and I think UConn needed to win their semi to get there.
I'll
Sounds
just
like
throw
we got a real big consensus here, Tim.
What's that?
That sounds like we've got a real big consensus.
Yeah, just throw the other thing in there with Virginia. I mean, it was pretty clear that injury really hurt them from a scoring perspective. I mean, they just really stream when they're going to get against a decent defensive team, they're going to struggle to score. And Billis mentioned that several times last night, you know, how that injury really affects them, their ability to have a little bit better outside game. So you think, Dave, you're saying consensus of UConn, right?
I mean, I went back and forth on it 10 different times, so I'm not going to lose any sleep on it one way or the
All
other.
right. I kind of agree with Brad on this one. Like, I just think they're going to get docked a little bit because of that injury. I just think they are. How about the rest of the order? Now we get to that crucial 4-5. We had Iowa State, Miami, St. Mary's, TCU, San Diego State. I'm looking to see how far down. We had Duke at the time. We had Duke 25 at the time.
I think San Diego State pushes out St. Mary's.
Yep.
I think that's probably agreed by everyone.
I still have San Diego State on my 6th line, but I have them ahead of St. Mary's.
Okay. How far, I guess the question here on these teams, who makes 4, who makes 5, you got to throw Duke into this mix, obviously, and A&M. So, you know, we had them Iowa State, Miami, St. Mary's, Xavier, the last 4 seed. Is there an appetite? First of all, is there an appetite to move Indiana off the 4 line?
No.
No.
Not based on where they were before.
Yep.
Okay.
Agreed.
So appetite to move Virginia off the 4 line.
Yes.
Yes.
Now again, Virginia was, I believe, 10 overall, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think just watching the way Duke has played over the course of the last few weeks, they're a different team. I just don't see how you can have Virginia ahead of Duke with the injury, with the way Duke's playing, with the way Virginia has looked. Again, I keep going back to the common sense basketball factor, but I think it needs to be taken into account. I think Duke has a legitimate case to be on that 4 line.
I would concur. What date was the reveal?
20th.
The 20th.
So we got 3 weeks.
So
18th.
since the 20th, Duke hasn't lost, and they won at Carolina, routed Pittsburgh, beat Miami, and beat Virginia. So I think, that also includes, a win against North Carolina State. So that's if North Carolina State does make it in and Pittsburgh makes it in, which, they're 2 of our last couple teams, there's 4 wins against the field in the last 2 weeks, including 2 teams that we had ahead of them before. And the fact that, I could see Iowa State being on that 4 line based on where they were before as a 3. But that's, I kind of ended up too with just that and being Duke, that I could see them being the last 4 seed.
To play devil's advocate, I was arguing for Duke to be a 6 seed last week and didn't get any traction versus Creighton. So have they really done enough to move from 7 to 4 in 1 week?
Well, they won the ACC tournament, which
didn't help Virginia Tech much last year.
Well, it's funny you bring up Virginia Tech. So I was going to say, Dave, if you like teams who have won 4 games against tournament teams, may I reintroduce Vanderbilt to the conversation?
I don't. Like I said, if it were my bracket, the last four would be a little bit different than what we have. But I think you could make a case that Oklahoma State and Vanderbilt both are better than a couple of teams we currently have in our last 4 in.
I
don't
too,
think
I
it's going to happen.
I moved to Duke one spot ahead of Virginia after last night, but I have them at 17 and 18, and I have Iowa State at 16. Again, they were a 3 in the, I think they were 11 overall in the reveal, spanked Baylor twice since then. And as I brought up, a week ago, that win over TCU was a, late Wednesday night game. We don't know how much that factored into the reveal. It's timing of everything on reveals and conference tournaments. It's great.
And on that note, I would agree a lot with Kerry. I said I had moved Iowa State up earlier this week to the Final Four.
Yep.
And so to me, that's really where it's at. It's the last 4 seed, and then the next 2 fives kind of fall in line after that.
Yeah, the only thing, I think you mentioned this the other day, Dave, the only thing that would pause me there is a 19 and 13 team at the top 4. That is a kind of a, that's one loss away from West Virginia's record, Granted, different looking resume.
Yeah, because Iowa State has much higher end wins than West Virginia.
Right. Their metrics don't suggest a top 4 seed.
And that's the other thing. If you're going back to, Duke's now what, 16 this morning?
Maybe the committee looks at that and says, well, they got as far as we expected them to get. So really, they kind of did enough to hold that seed line.
I had already dropped Virginia to a 5 like 4 days ago. I just swapped Duke and Virginia on the 5 line. I'm with you. I would not have made a full seed line adjustment based on what was a close game. Felt like Duke was in control. I think they did end up winning by 10, but just because freaking Kihei Clark was like 1 for 50 from the field.
The other thing too is, if you look at, Virginia does have that win over Baylor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe what we're talking about here is if we seem pretty set that Connecticut, Indiana, and Xavier are all going to be, or Tennessee, Indiana, and Xavier are all going to be 4. Who's our Final 4? Who's the Final 4 seed then? Is it Iowa State? Is it a TCU? Virginia stay there and Duke 1 spot behind?
If you're bringing up the Tim, if you're bringing up the win over Baylor as a point for Virginia as a 4 seed, like Iowa State beat them 3 times. So.
Oh yeah, no, I was just comparing Duke and Virginia.
Yeah,
no,
Duke didn't
no
do
question.
much of anything. Aside, Duke's best win was that neutral game against Xavier in Portland before we knew Xavier was any good.
Yeah, Iowa State's resume is just so different than those other 2.
Yeah.
This morning, I put out a personal bracket on what I would do if I was the whole committee, and I had TCU and Iowa State both as 4 seeds. But my brain is telling me that UVA won the regular season. They got that non-conference win over Baylor. They made the ACC tournament final. That seems like a lot to add up compared to an Iowa State team with a lot of losses. And TCU, same deal, just a lot of losses, even if they have that Miles injury.
Miami won the regular season.
They split
tied,
it on
tied.
Yeah, it was co-champs.
Yeah, they got the tiebreaker.
So then I guess,
all right.
Go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, do we want to text me a vote on Virginia? Who we ranking here? Virginia, Duke, Xavier, and Iowa State. Is that fair? Or throwing Xavier out, moving them up? They're definitely a 4, and just ranking those other 3.
I would probably just rank those other 3.
Okay.
Unless somebody feels different.
I'm sorry, can you confirm what the 3 teams are that we're ranking?
Yeah, let's text to Graham, by the way. Let's keep the same process we had before. We're just ranking Virginia, Iowa State, and Duke. Everybody, thanks for joining us, by the way. We're sponsored by Godfather's Pizza, Pizza Pie, Pile High, 1,200 locations around the country. Check them out, godfathers.com. Right now, we're just kind of doing some real important cut lines, 4, 5, and then we'll move on to 5, 6 to see where teams stand. And we're just doing a vote right now between Virginia, Duke, and Iowa State.
Did you notice the dumb observation I made at one point during our many hours? All of the K schools made it. Kent State and Kennesaw State both won. So 5 for 5 on the K schools. So might as well leave them.
We want to put Xavier ahead of Virginia. I mean, not that it matters, but
Definitely Xavier ahead of Virginia for sure.
okay. And then do we want to go Iowa State and then Duke?
Sure.
I will say Iowa State had more first place votes than Duke, if that's a tiebreaker.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. There's your tiebreaker in a short amount of time.
All right. So now we all agreed St. Mary's is out, down to 6. So we have, who else we moving up? I think we're all in agreement TCU 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think TCU's a 5.
All right,
Well,
Dave,
we had
time for-
Miami there before. Where did we move him down before?
Time
Oh
for
yeah,
your
we got,
Texas
yeah, we
A&M
had
argument, Dave.
Miami in there. Yeah, you're right. Duke replaced Miami. So
TCU, Miami in that order, maybe.
So here comes
Yeah,
the
so-
question. Does anybody,
yeah, go ahead, Dave.
does anybody feel that if we had, I think, I don't remember where we had what, A&M as a 6 before?
A&M was 23 overall.
So they were they'd be 6.
Yeah, 6. So yeah, that would be my.
Do
my
they
question.
does Texas A&M bump Miami for the and/or San Diego State for the final 5?
They bump both of them for me. For my reasoning about San Diego State from earlier, and then Miami, you start comparing those two resumes. Miami doesn't have any high Q1 wins, whereas Texas A&M has played really well down the stretch. They're 4-3 high Q1. They do have those 2 Q4 losses, which gives me a little bit of pause. But their metrics, other than their strength of record, seem to be in a better spot. So I kind of give the edge to A&M over those 2 others.
I mean, I don't really have a good argument for why I think Miami will be there other than human nature. And I think they're coming off the Elite Eight, returned most of the same team, and they won the ACC regular season championship. I just have a hard time seeing the committee saying the ACC champ should be a 6 seed. I just do.
Fair point.
And I could see a case. Yeah, that's where it gets cruxy, because Texas A&M started the season very slow. Miami started it well, but you got 5 teams for 4 spots.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect summation of that, Dave. We just have more 5 seed quality teams than spots. That's what we're looking at.
Because you could make the same on our 1 line this year. I mean, I think Texas is a 1 seed worthy team, but there's only 4, so somebody's going to be a team.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even, like Brad said, it's not even close when you look at the resume.
Well, should we vote on maybe Miami, San Diego State, and Texas A&M, and just do those 3?
Sure.
Fair.
Autocorrect SDSU to Adam. That would be confusing.
And then Tim, I know we're almost out of time. I think probably the other thing is that real quick is the bottom of that 6-7 line too, because there's
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll look at that real quick. Sure. We got a little bit of time. So as long as everybody's okay with that, run a little bit over. I think it's important enough to do.
Because I really respect everybody in the room, and I'm curious to get what their thoughts are as a collective committee on like differentiating Kentucky, Missouri, and Creighton, for an example, for potential Final Six,
Yeah,
or if somebody else has somebody else in that group.
that's my 20, 24, 25, 26 right there. And I moved Missouri ahead of Kentucky this morning.
Net being 42. Generally speaking, you don't see a team with a net that high as a 6 seed or above. I've gone back over the last number of years. It just doesn't happen, even though, their predictive metrics are not good. That's one reason to not shoot them up the board, even though they don't have any bad losses. 6-9 against quad 1, 10-9 quad 1 and 2 is solid. So then for me, it's really Creighton, it's Kentucky, and for me, there's also St. Mary's in that mix. Now we know where St. Mary's really only lost to Gonzaga. They did get blown out. But I think just from a resume standpoint, Creighton is not great. Not great. Kentucky has been playing better, 12-8 against quad 1 and 2 opponents, whereas Creighton is just 9-11. Creighton does have the better predictive metrics. I mean, I could definitely see it going either way. Creighton was also mentioned in the reveal as a 5 seed. So I'm definitely open about those.
Yeah, that's the tough one. Like, I've looked at this a million times. I can't. When you look at the resume, there's no way you can have Creighton above those other teams. But the only thing that sticks in my mind is that like they had Creighton's video popped up ready to go. So they had to be really close. And they're again getting back to like Graham's point earlier, you dropping them from say 17 to 25. Did they do enough bad things to do that?
I mean, personally, I was really down to Creighton and St. Mary's. And St. Mary's was another team that was mentioned on that 5 line, because you start looking at St. Mary's and they only have the 2 quad 1 wins, just 2 wins over the field.
And I know committee changes from year to year, but historically St. Mary's has gotten a huge shaft from the selection committee.
That is true.
So wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah,
absolutely. I will say this though, St. Mary's has 2 good wins. They're both really good wins. Gonzaga has come on strong. That San Diego State neutral court win's looking better. And when you combine it with their predictives, I just don't see them being worse than a 6 seed.
Well, the other thing too is if we look at Creighton, and Tim would know this better than anybody, but since the reveal, Creighton's wins are St. John's, Georgetown, DePaul, and Villanova.
Yep.
Their losses are Marquette in a close game at home, at Villanova, and then Xavier in MSG the other day. So, that's the other reason for me why I ended up having them 26 out of that group from that 25 to 20 or 24 to 26 spot.
Yeah, I think Creighton's resume just does not hold up when you factor in they came back from injuries and really haven't performed that well. So I agree with you, Dave. I think they are the odd team out here.
Yep. At one point I was thinking, well, Dave and I talked about this hedging a little bit on the 6. So if they're 7 and 5, but I don't see any way they're going to be a 5. So, 6, 7 is, 7's about right, I think. So what did we get back to the other vote first, Graham?
Yep, we got Texas A&M as the team that advanced up to the 5 line, and Miami and San Diego State were tied. So I would suggest on the overall seed list, we put Miami 1 spot ahead just because they were higher last time, same procedure.
You said San Diego State and
so Miami would be 21, San Diego State would be 22.
All right.
I personally actually have both those teams on the 5 line in that order too. So I think it's really close between the 5s and 6s this year.
Kentucky and then St. Mary's, right?
I mean, I think had Kentucky beaten Vanderbilt and then beaten A&M again on Friday, ahead of the weekend, I think Kentucky could have been in discussion for one of that final 5 spot as well. But I think that went out the door with the loss of Vanderbilt.
Certainly Missouri would jump Northwestern.
I think the discussion for me that really jumps out here is, looking at that whole list. I think FAU, where do they land? Because I do think they've done some quality work recently that you could even argue. I have them at 29th overall. I think you could argue they should replace Michigan State. I kept Michigan State at 28th, but I definitely think FAU has done enough to at least push to the 8 line for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think FAU should be an 8 at worst.
How far up would we go on that chain?
I mean, I have FAU at 29 too right now, which is the first 8 seed.
Same here.
But I could see a case for them. I think Northwestern's ahead of Michigan State based on overall body of work.
Yes.
And so then and I don't know what the committee, if they'll make a contingency today if Memphis beats Houston, whether they would consider them as a low end 7, but we're not going to have time to get into that. So I think it's really a Michigan State FAU. Michigan State's obviously going to have a higher number of quality wins because of the league they play in.
And then again, the problem you run into is if you put Michigan State as the 8 and FAU as the 7, then you have all Big Ten teams all over the place, and it just makes life hell.
So what happens is somebody ends up getting bumped anyway, just because eventually it becomes actually bracketing principle impossible.
Right.
Right. I would just wedge them in between Iowa and Michigan State.
But the inevitability of somebody getting bumped is why, like, I'm putting Florida Atlantic where I think they should be. That, I mean, we brought it up last week, like that resume time and again seems to be a 7 seed, like Wofford, Murray State. So I think they should be a 7, and the team getting bumped is Penn State going from a 9 to a 10. I don't think you mess with the 7-8 line when you can just as easily mess with the 9-10 line. Well,
I would say this: the only thing, if there's a team on the 9 that's going to get bumped, I would bump Illinois back to a 10 and keep Penn State at a 9.
Yeah, and if Penn State beats Purdue today, that's what I'm doing.
I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, Illinois does have those 2 power wins from the beginning of the season, but once conference play started, what have they done?
They've had some decent wins at home.
Yeah,
right. They beat Michigan State at home. They beat Northwestern at home. They beat Rutgers at home.
I mean, they're 2-11 against Q1 opponents.
Yeah,
you could argue Illinois deserves an 11 seed. I think they're going to hold on to a 9, but you could definitely make an argument they should be on the bubble.
Well, I mean, I definitely put Penn State as, forget the fact that Penn State beat them 3 times. I just think if you look at the overall resume, to me, it just comes out how much weight does the committee place on UCLA and Texas from 3 months ago? If they still say, hey, that victory is like it happened yesterday, then there's no way Illinois is not in an 8-9 game. But if you look at how they played down the stretch and you're going, yeah, I could see them easily falling onto the 10 line.
I definitely consider them as dropping to a 10, but like you said, how much are they weighing those wins? And the reveal showed like a UConn who had beaten Alabama early in the season. They seem to have some recency bias. So will that stick? Who knows?
Yeah, I would vote not to dump Illinois that far. Just not that they don't deserve it, just that they don't. Another little tidbit for you, Carrie. Penn State, I was adding up last night. I've never seen this before. In wins, number 26 to 50 on the net, they have 10. I've never seen a team have a bulk in the middle like that before. They only have 1 high quality win, 1 low quality win to the top 75. Yeah. They have just a jumble of 10 in the middle.
I would say, so keeping Illinois up there, I think there's Rocco mentioned the front of the jersey sometimes. I think people just look at Illinois and think that's a talented basketball team, and it makes sense that they've had those 2 high-quality wins because they've got so much talent. They've struggled to put it together at times, but I just wonder if the committee's going to kind of have that in the back of their minds that, yeah, we know they've got.
Good word for it.
To Tim's point earlier, like Penn State is Iowa State light, right? If they had this full collection of wins, 4 days ago, obviously we're not sure how much to move them up, but man, they've got so many not great wins, but good wins. They'd be easily a 7, but we're not, just because of the timing and trying to guess what the committee's doing. We're not going to move them up that high.
I
Well,
could see
we
Penn
do
State
have-
ended up on the end at the back. I could see Penn State on the 8 line tonight.
Mhm.
They deserve it. They deserve to be an 8. If we were doing it just from a resume standpoint, they should be there. But based on historical data from what the committee does, I don't know if they can get that high.
Okay, we do have to make a move though, because we have 5 Big Ten teams in the 8-9. So,
That's what I'm saying. I've got Penn State at 36 on my seed list, but I have them as a 10 seed in my bracket.
That's what
If we
I
had-
have too.
If we want to
So-
just swap Penn State and Auburn on the seed list, whatever. But
I mean, yeah, I mean, pure resume standpoint, Illinois is probably slightly better than Auburn. But if so, the committee, I think, and somebody tell me if I'm wrong, if they're the last one of that group, the lowest of all the Big Ten teams in that 8-9, they would be the one that would be most likely to be dropped.
Dropped, yeah.
correct.
You're not going to drop a team that's above them just because, if you have to make that consideration.
And I think that's what happened with BYU Iona in 2012 is the committee has shown they're not going to affect the teams above you. They're going to always try to send the team that's the lowest ranked on the overall seed list out to the worst seed.
Well, and BYU
Well,
as
unless-
a first 4 team
unless-
is a freaking nightmare.
unless your team's athletic director is committee chair, then you move from a 10 to an 8. But we won't go there.
Another reason that we'll keep Indiana right where they are.
That was in my mind. I had Indiana as my last 3 until I think I switched it this morning or yesterday. I was like, oh, man.
All right,
I think
had
had
some of
Indiana played today, I think you could make a case that they could have been the final 3.
Yep.
Yep.
Hey, one last thing. Do we want to, Dave's point about Maryland, do we want to flip flop them in Arkansas, or does it really at this point?
I say we just flip all the 8s and 9s because I'm always wrong.
Only, as they would say, only 1 point for you on the 8 and 9s.
Yeah, just a
Yeah,
different
the
colored jersey.
George Costanza theory may be our best theory here, huh?
All right, we good with this?
Yeah.
All right,
I don't even see it
Excellent
because you
work,
took it down, but it's good to me.
all right. Graham has volunteered to stick so everybody can flee and do their own thing because I know everybody's busy. Graham's gonna stick around. We're just gonna go through the bracket real quick and Pop it up, we
I can stay around, Tim. I'm not.
Okay,
under-
that'd be-
I'm not.
one
under a
more
tight
would be-
deadline.
one more would be great. It's not gonna take very long. I've got this color coded now, so it's gonna go faster. Great. Everybody else can split. I'll get back with you when we're not so busy here in the next couple hours about some stuff I kind of like to do as we move forward here, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yep, absolutely, guys. Enjoy
See
the
you
rest of
guys.
the day. And Carrie, you can sleep for 2 days after this.
I wish I got
We'll
so
sit
much
down.
more to do, but go Vandy.